Hey guys, it's Simgie and welcome back to another storytelling speed build. Today we're building the first home of a young couple and their infant daughter, Lily. But first let me start from the beginning. Mark Winston and Claire Winston, formerly known as Claire Batcher, met in high school. Was it love at first sight? Well, quite the contrary. Claire Batcher didn't think of finding love in high school. Why was that so important for everyone? She spent most of her free time with her nose in a book. She was already in love with the words written on paper where her mind could wander in another world and meet new people that felt close enough to touch. She wanted to reach people the same way these authors have reached her. Pull her heartstrings at the story of forbidden love, curl her toes at a horror movie, made her stomach ache as she cried laughing at a love-hate romance. So she began writing, bringing a notebook and pen with her to the cafeteria, scribbling down every word that came to mind. Day after day, when the school bell rang, she had a new idea to write down. But at this particular lunchtime, as she was scratching away at her notebook, a shadow came upon her. Claire, taken out of her zone, looked up to see the cheeky smile of the school's quarterback, Kevin. He laughed, snatched at it from her hands, and the cheerleaders in the next table giggled. Well, what do we have here? A story! Ooh, little Claire is all grown up from her books that she decided to write her own. Let's see. Is this a saucy fanfiction? Really spicy? I bet you're really... Cut off from his monologue, the notebook slammed from his hands and onto the floor. Claire, frozen from embarrassment, stayed in her seat as she watched the back of Mark Winston. Have you run out of ways to impress these girls, Kevin? Got a little too soft in the field? Go pick your nose and not at people. Kevin could have easily retorted back, but the eruption of laughter made his bones jump out of his skin that he remained quiet. What? Cat got your tongue? Get out of here. With a push to Kevin's shoulder, he stumbled backwards and onto the tray of one of the cheerleaders, dripping his pants with piping hot soup. Mark picked up Claire's notebook and handed it to her with a smile. As their eyes met, Claire was struck by Mark's piercing blue eyes, and she finally knew what it meant to have your stomach flutter at the sight of someone. From that day forward, he was all Claire could think about, from the moment that she woke to the last thought before sleep. But to Mark, he has had his eye on her since they started sophomore year. After having the same classes together, her lone figure made him wonder why someone with such a unique and striking appearance could be so alone. He tried, for a month, but he was so intimidated by her confidence he didn't think she'd want to be with someone like him, someone who relies on people to be confident in himself. But now, he had an in. And as sophomore year went by, their friendship blossomed into romance. From their first date, first kiss, first anniversary, junior, senior, college. By some miracle, they managed to get into the same university, Mark studying in sociology and Claire studying creative writing. They wanted to live together, and so they rented a 5-bedroom apartment with 4 other students. They were happy and hopeful for the future. They had plans, and even though they haven't talked about it yet, they saw themselves together until they turned gray. Mark would kiss her good morning, then spend hours apart, studying, lectures, or work, and they'd come back together again at night, falling asleep in each other's arms. But eventually, Mark's sociology degree became demanding. Final exams were spent in the library with a study group all hunched around the table with books and coffee littered in front of them. Claire spent weeks alone. When her heart ached for him, she reached for her phone and called him, missing his voice, missing his touch, missing his warmth, but most of all, missing how he would have his thumb stroking her temple and told her the many reasons why it's all going to turn out okay. Each time she called him, it went unanswered. Her mind drifted to a dark corner she's never been before. What if this is it? Is it all worth it? What if he's not the one? This corner was scary, and she had no one to shed the light. She went for her books, but unable to read through the tears welling in her eyes, soaking the page. She sobbed quietly, even though she wanted to scream. Then the door opened, and Mark walked in with bags under his eyes, dark circles. He heard her sniffle, and the tiredness went away. He shut the door and rushed to her side, leaving his hand on her leg. He wiped her tears and asked, "What's wrong?" Claire only shook her head and jumped into his arms. All of a sudden, the voices echoing around her head disappeared, and it was like a gray cloud swept away. Nothing. Now, she smiled. When the stress of finals subsided and summer vacation began, Mark and Claire took a trip to the Library of Congress, a book lover's dream. Claire didn't want to make it known that she's been there before with her dad as a little girl. Mark was so wound up about it, she didn't want to spoil his excitement. As they arrived, the sun shone high above them, its heat beating down on them like a furnace. Mark and Claire climbed up the steps, feeling the cool breeze brush past them. Mark takes it in, stopping at the top to lean against the marble pillar. Claire turned around, giggling at him. "Can't stand the heat, Jack Frost?" Mark saw the big smile on her face and his heart leapt. This was the perfect moment. It has to be now. And so, without breaking eye contact, Mark went down on one knee. A lump formed in his throat. "Claire, will you marry me?" Without hesitation, she nodded her head yes, and they pulled each other into a kiss. They couldn't wait. 1 month after their engagement, they got married in the city hall, planning a much grander wedding in the future. Now a married couple going back to university, they still couldn't shake the feeling of officially spending the rest of their lives together. For months alongside their student lives, they searched for a house to call their home. Claire didn't think Mark was so picky. Every house they saw was not good enough. But to Claire, she envisioned them together in every single one. In the whirl of house hunting, writing, studying, researching, Claire fell ill. Headaches and nausea, she figured it was stress. So on her sick day, Claire sat in the kitchen with a book in hand and hot tea in front of her. A smack on the kitchen counter made her jump. She looked up from her book to see Tess, her roommate. "I heard you spewing your guts out, Claire. You're lucky I had one lying around." Claire looked down to see a pregnancy test. She laughed it off. "It's just stress." "Have you been keeping track at all?" Actually, she thought for a second. "No," and gulped. Claire gathered herself, taking the pregnancy test, and waited. She couldn't let go of her sight. She watched as the first line appeared, and then she choked as the second pink line became visible. Joy rushed through her, and then a momentary sadness. As if she wasn't nauseous enough, her mind spun uncontrollably. "I'm not ready. What happens now? How is this possible?" A knock on the door, and then a familiar calming voice. "Claire?" She opened the door, the pregnancy test in her hands. She whispered, "I'm pregnant." Unsure on what to say, he searched her eyes for answers, but he's as lost as she is. But he smiled, and because of that, she did too. When they embraced each other in this shaky situation, they knew what they wanted. They found a cheap cottage with an overgrown garden around it. The inside was dusty, dark, and cramped, but Mark pulled up his sleeves and went to work in his new home. Claire washed up inside, redecorated, with what they could afford. After months of tinkering, Mark and Claire sat on their couch at the end of the day, holding each other. They stared at the travel crib in front of them, imagining a little one staring back at them, with curious big eyes and a smile that melted their hearts. And that's the Winston story. They were created by the user Soren7900, and they're available in the gallery to download. If you like this home, you can also download it in the gallery with the user SimplySimgie, like my YouTube username. So just a little explanation of why I did the things I did. The concept of this build is for it to be a starter, like in the story, a cheap house that the young couple can afford as they build their finances, because it's getting really tight in the economy right now. And the reason why it's so cheap is that it's kind of a cottage that has been ignored for forever. That's why there's so much landscaping and overgrown mushrooms. And while I was building this, I was like, I could have built this in Henford-on-Bagley, but in my defense, this little area in Copperdale was super pretty and thought it was fitting as a first home type thing. Anyway, so as explained, the cottage was overgrown, but they managed to kind of trim as much of it as possible, neating up the hedges, cutting grass and such. And on the inside, I thought of making it a mix of old and remodeled, like they could afford to buy wallpaper that they liked, but couldn't afford a new kitchen set, for example. And since baby stuff is so expensive to begin with, they'd rather spend money on their new baby rather than splurging on new appliances and cabinets, which is way more expensive. So if you like storytelling speed builds, leave a like. It would really let me know to make more of these. And don't be afraid to comment story suggestions or send me the gallery ID of a sim you've created to write a story on. And subscribe to see more, and I'll see you in the next video.